For the first time ever, we have Super Wild Card Weekend coming up this week in the NFL with the playoffs beginning this week. We have 2 games on Saturday. We have 3 games on Sunday, 1 game on Monday, which means we have a bunch of different slates you can play for DFS. We've got the 2-gamer, the 3-gamer, the single-game slate. We've got the full 6-game slate. You can go Sunday to Monday. You can do whatever you want. You can lop off the Monday game as well. We have a lot of different amalgamations. I don't know if that's the right word. Ways you can play things for DFS for this week. We're going to break them down each and let you know our prioritizations for NFL DFS and get you set for what should be a fun weekend of football. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor of numberFire.com. Brandon, we started the show about 30 seconds late because we were already yelling at each other about Miles Sanders. So we're off to a blasting start. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm fine. I know you're not a fan of how many tabs I generally have open on my computer. It's very bad. This week, I did want to clarify that despite all the offerings that we have on FanDuel, we're not going to cover all of them. You kind of implied that. It was hard enough to run Sims for, like, we're going to cover the Saturday slate, the Sunday slate, the Monday slate, the 6-game slate, but we're not going to, I can't run Sims for the late Sunday. We're focused on 4 slates. That's a good number of slates. I just wanted to clarify.
I think we should do all of them. I think that you should just run it without Sims. And just
if I don't have Sims, who am I? I mean, at this point, you know,
I mean, you're the Dong Doula. Like, what else? What else could people need to know outside of the fact that you're the Dong Doula? And the Dong Doula don't need no Sims to talk about no DFS, which is what we're gonna do for today. And I think that, like, the fun thing for this year too is I was kind of shocked when I opened up the lobby and saw how big the contests were for the Saturday through Monday slate, because last year they were bad. And like, they're not as big as the Saturday only and Sunday only, but like, I'm really happy with the offerings there because I kind of dig the 6-game slate. I kind of dig the Sunday only slate. And I'm kind of okay with with playing more heavily on the Saturday through Monday slate and just kind of, building around that, given that we have that offering.
Look, I mean, whatever you want, you can kind of play it. There's a lot of good games, some bad games, and sometimes it's fun on smaller slates to avoid bad games. So, I mean, it's like Thanksgiving, but a good holiday, I guess.
Oh gosh, you don't need to besmirch Miles Sanders and besmirch Thanksgiving all at the same time. Just rude. So we're going to mute Brandon, and the way we'll do things today is we're going to go through Saturday only first, then Sunday only, then Monday only. We'll mix in discussion of the 6-game slate throughout there as well. We'll make Brandon run the Sims for every single slate while we are talking here. If you are listening on Sunday and want to skip ahead to the Sunday only discussion, I put the timestamp in the description over on the podcast description. Wherever you're listening to this, you can find that. If you're watching on YouTube, sorry, you can't skip around as easily. But if you are listening to the podcast feed, you want to skip to Sunday or to Monday, check out the episode description. There'll be timestamps in there that will let you know when those slates begin. The World Fantasy Basketball Championship is scheduled to take place on March 13th, which means there is still plenty of time for you to qualify for the live final. Get in on the action, enter your best 9-man NBA lineup into a WFBBC qualifier and finish in first place. Each finalist VIP package includes a trip for 2 to New Orleans, 2 luxury box game tickets to the Hornets-Pelicans game on March 11th, VIP entry to a special fan event, and so much more. The live final will be here before you know it. So head to FanDuel.com/WFBBC today and compete for your chance to party by the Bayou. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. Also, I lied. You can skip ahead on YouTube because I will have, like, the bottom things will say where we're at. So it says Saturday only now. When it skips to Sunday only, it's talking Sunday. So if you're watching YouTube and you want to skip ahead, just look at the bottom thinger there. And that should tell you where we're at on the show. Let's start things off here with the Saturday-only slate. It is a 2-gamer. It is the Raiders, the Bengals. Right now, spread is down to 4.5. Bengals 4.5-point favorites. The total has come down a smidge to 48.5. The second game is the Patriots at the Bills. Bills 4-point favorites. Total in that game is 44. Injuries to note here for this Saturday-only slate. T. Higgins was added to the injury report on Thursday with a foot injury. Typically, guys get added midweek when they suffer an injury in practice. So that's a concern. This means we should consider Higgins legitimately questionable for right now. Emmanuel Sanders, full practice on Tuesday and Wednesday. He should return after a 2-game absence. Gabriel Davis led the team in Week 18 in routes, but I had a very good tournament team that had Gabriel Davis on it and was very mad every time he did not haul in a pass. 14 targets, 3 catches. He drove me nuts. Usually I am a huge fan of Gabe the Babe, but I think there's a chance his role shifts with Emmanuel Sanders being back this week, as sad as that may make me. Okay, so for me, Brandon, looking at this Saturday-only slate, the key is whether you can pitch yourself on deviating at quarterback, because I can say with a lot of certainty that Josh Allen and Joe Burrow will be the most popular plays in the slate. I would not be shocked if those two themselves suck up 80% of all roster rates on this 2-game slate. In theory, that means you have an incentive to deviate. I'm not sure if I can, because the Patriots do not want to use Mac Jones. Derek Carr has struggled a lot since Henry Ruggs left. I don't blame him. And also, like, the Raiders are in a very tough spot, playing that super late game on Sunday night, now flying across the country, playing the first game here this week. So that to me is the key here, is can you talk yourself into Carr or Jones? As we talk right now, I don't think I can. What about you? Is that the key for you on this slate, and how are you viewing quarterback?
So we talked about this with the Thanksgiving slate when it comes to quarterback, is you're kind of figuring out whether you can bet against the better plays. And right now my Sims have Josh Allen and Joe Burrow combined for about 75% probability for either of those to lead the slate in FanDuel points. Josh Allen about 43%, or about 45%. Burrow about 30% himself. And really, Derek Carr makes up most of the rest. Mac Jones is about just under 10%, which it's going to take a very specific set of circumstances for Mac Jones to lead this slate in FanDuel points at quarterback. And yes, there's more to a slate than just how a quarterback performs, but obviously quarterback performance is generally tied to offensive performance. So if you're low on Mac Jones, I mean, you can't really be that high on any of his pass catchers, but I think it really comes down then to Derek Carr and whether you can talk yourself into Derek Carr and this Raiders offense staying, in step with Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and whether or not Josh Allen can be stifled. Now we have rematches for all of these games, 2 games, of course, with the Patriots and the Bills, but be mindful the first matchup there was that heavy win game. So if you're the type of person to look back at how teams played each other, just keep that in mind. But, ultimately I'm with you. It's really hard to justify deviating from Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. But of course, if I do that, it's going to be for Derek Carr. I don't think I could talk myself into any Mac Jones.
Yeah. And the issue with Carr is that he loses high leverage work to Marcus Mariota.
Yeah.
So like in fantasy, a quarterback, you need touchdowns to score. Touchdowns are rushing, and Carr's not a big runner, and he loses some touchdown equity to Marcus Mariota. It doesn't make Mariota in play, but it just hurts Carr a lot. So that's why it's tougher for me to deviate at quarterback. So right now, I think I'm probably just going to go Allen and Burrow. I know that's not like the game theory type way to play things, but I just can't deviate elsewhere. I would also say on the context of the full 6-game slate, quarterback here is not going to be super high. I'm fine with Burrow being like up there, but like I have concerns. I think I have better options mostly on the other slates here. Where are you at Burrow versus Allen for this weekend?
Most likely leaning toward Burrow for the savings. But the thing that I just can't get away from, and we're super data driven. We try to focus on just the underlying data to make all of our decisions. I think the one narrative you could really spin is like, okay, the Patriots have two games worth of Josh Allen themselves, plus all of the other film It's not the playoffs. Is there something special that they can cook up to render Josh Allen, I can't say irrelevant, because even in games when he has bad passing, he has the ability to run for, 50, 60, 70 yards and a touchdown. If he runs for 50 yards and a touchdown, I mean, that alone on this slate is going to 50 rushing yards and a touchdown is 11 FanDuel points. And I don't know if Mac Jones is going to get there very often himself. 11's a little bit low, but the point being, so for me, I realistically think I will have the most Joe Burrow of the quarterbacks on this 2-game slate. But I'm with you that if we look at this in the context of the full weekend, probably not a slate where I'm looking too heavily at quarterback, especially with T. Higgins banged up, because that is going to impact Joe Burrow negatively.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. If we had full, and we might get word today that Higgins practices in full, but we don't know that as of right now. The reason I'm okay being with you and being a little bit higher on Burrow than Allen is, I mean, it's a third time they face each other within the span of a month, basically. Because we can throw out that win game from a data perspective, but they did just see him, and the Bills threw a decent amount in that game too. So they just saw him. They just saw him again after that. Now seeing him for the third time in a couple of weeks. So that's a downside. Also, Allen has really struggled in rough weather, and the wind is not bad in this game, but it's going to be very cold. And Josh Allen is from California. I know he played college in Wyoming, but he's from California, and his numbers in cold games are concerning, is what I would say. A lot of that's because he's had the win games, and that's in the sample too. But at least it does stick in my mind. I think the one reason I might view them as being even versus definitively Burrow over Allen, despite the fact that Allen has seen the Patriots now twice in a month, is the rushing. The rushing has been so good for Josh Allen recently. They basically just said once they were in a situation where they might not make the playoffs, they said, okay, you're going to run. Past 5 games, Allen's rushing yardage outputs, 109, 24, 64, 81, 63. He's kind of become like Lamar Jackson from a rushing perspective, and
with the potential to throw 35, 40, 45 times with actual passing production. That's the scary part.
100%. So that's why to me they're even versus not being definitively Burrow. So I think that it's not fun to say, oh, I think they're about even. I think they're about even. It's my hot take.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that in a vacuum, I'm going to say Josh Allen for sure. But $1,000 can go a long way on a 2-game slate where you really don't have that much. I mean, it's just 2 games. You can only realistically have so much value. So I think it's pretty even. I do think that Derek Carr is a little tiny bit justifiable, but you're really, again, betting against Burrow and Allen rather than kind of betting on Carr to have a big game, because like you said, Mariota coming in those high leverage packages, it just, and I know we're sticking on quarterback a lot here, but kind of hit on your
key driver of everything. Yeah. It indicates how we feel about receiver, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's why we are there. Okay. Let's start with the pass catchers here, since we're already on the subject of quarterbacks. Wide receivers pretty bad for the Saturday slate, and I probably don't need the word pretty in there. It's just bad. Honestly, in part because I don't have super high offensive expectations for this team. Prior to Wednesday, I was very excited to be very heavy on T. Higgins. Now, obviously, that changes a bit with the missed practice or the limited practice on Wednesday. So a bit more uncertainty there. If we get T at a limited session on Thursday and we get confirmation of a Shefty bomb on Friday night that he's good to go, I'll feel very good about him at $6,900. If he's outs less limited, I think that does increase the appeal in Tyler Boyd, who is not a super high upside guy. I will say on 2-game slates, I don't focus as much on upside. You can win a slate via, having one high upside guy in there, but the odds you don't get 3 high upside receivers are higher. So I think that helps there too. So to me, receiver really underwhelming. I think if we're talking about the non-studs who could pop up here, I look at Higgins first, although I'd probably include as being a stud. I think that Zay Jones, I know, he's a stud. Zay Jones, $5,300, 8 targets this past week, even with Darren Waller being back. He's had a 31% deep target share in the games he's played with Waller since Henry Ruggs was released. So I do like him, and I would put him above Gabe the Babe Davis, just because I'm a little bit worried that Manny Sanders takes some of that role back, given that Davis really, really struggled last week. So that's where I'm at with wide receiver. What about you at that position?
I think you pretty much hit on exactly how I'm feeling with the value plays that you mentioned being the guys that I would have discussed myself. I think that there is some merit to Tyler Boyd, even with T. Higgins. I'm not going to say that Tyler Boyd is dependent solely on the health of T. Higgins or anything, but Zay Jones you talked about with 90% route rate in Week 18, and you really want like large samples whenever you can find them. But in a must-win game, I think that is pretty telling as well. 90% of the routes last week with those 8 targets, 1 downfield, so at least 20 yards downfield, 2 in the red zone. That's a pretty good workload for 53. And if you just take a stab at Zay Jones, then that really opens up a lot. And I think that he's going to be kind of integral to getting to Josh Allen in a lot of lineups as well. So you want to make sure that on these 2-game slates, 3-game slates, that not every Josh Allen lineup, for example, is tied to Zay Jones.
Yeah.
So you got to be mindful of that if you're building multiple lineups. But yeah, I really think that Jones stands out, Boyd to some degree. And I would feel better about him, obviously, without T. Higgins. But I think that then you have to look at the other game here and say, am I really going to play any Patriots receivers with conviction and confidence? And for us, that's always been no. I feel like we're kind of alone in that. And then
it's different on a 2-game slate,
with conviction and confidence. I said, are we gonna?
I have a decent amount of confidence in Jacoby Myers.
Sure.
For better or for worse.
Jacoby's the one option there. But outside of that, then you got to figure out, what are you doing with Gabriel Davis? Can you play Cole Beasley? I know we're looking at receivers, but then you look at tight end, and it's want to make sure you kind of have some salary for Darren Waller, because the rest of tight end is gross. So I don't really want to play a lot of Patriots receivers, so I'm going to be heavy on Jacoby.
Yeah. I mean, I think that he's the only one I really want to play. Looking at they've had actually pretty stable health throughout the year. If you look at the 15 games they played with Nelson Aguilar being healthy, Myers is a 24% target share. Nobody else is above 14%, including Hunter Henry. Henry does have a 27% red zone share in that sample. So I think he's in play at tight end, because the odds that Waller and Knox don't perform super well are decently high, just because it's a volatile position. They don't have spotless profiles by any means. So I could see using Hunter Henry, but Jacoby Myers,
he's not saving you salary though.
No, he's not. Jacoby Myers, a 28% deep target share, 17% in the red zone. So I actually do think he's a decent play. I think the question is, do you prefer Myers versus Boyd? If there's no T. Higgins, I prefer Boyd. If there is T. Higgins, I prefer Jacoby Myers. Do you agree there?
I still think I prefer Tyler Boyd straight up.
Okay, that's fair.
I believe in the offense way more.
What about the Bills receivers? Because I think that it could just be recency bias, where I got burned very badly, by Gabe Davis this past week. Am I overthinking it and being worried that his snaps decrease with Manny being back?
So that's a tough one, because you never really can tell. And it's one of those spots that I like to point out that, there's value in seeing things a certain way and having them work out, but there's also uncertainty in assuming certain things that coaches will see and do, because that's not how it works. And it's always frustrating when people assume that it's going to work that way. But I think now Davis has led this team in routes the past 2 weeks, which is a little bit surprising. His catch rate over expectation last week was about 32 points below expected. Had a ton of air yards, 225 air yards. I really don't think you go away from that, even with the fact that his role really should kind of come back to earth a little bit. I still think that there's enough of a role for him to be in that 6-7 target range in an offense that might throw 45 times. So I'm not off of Davis, but I definitely am not as high as I was entering last week.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to phrase it, where I'm not off, because he could just keep his role. Maybe they don't overvalue one game and keep him in there. And if he keeps his role in the 4 games where he's had elevated snaps, He's at a 21% target share with 39% of the deep targets and 35% of the red zone. Like, that's an amazing role for 52. So if I assume he keeps the same role, I want to be on Gabe Davis. And like, the odds he keeps the same role, I think with Manny being back are, 50, 60%. And like, if I take that's 50, 60% and cut it down to like, okay, how often in that 50, 60% does he beast out? Probably 50%. So that's still like a 30% Gabriel Davis exposure level. That is the thought process I'm going through. Yeah, I see you laughing at me.
No. Well, no, I looked at, so he had 5.4 FanDuel points
this
past week.
I stared at it.
I know. My model for expected FanDuel points had him at 20.5.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
and a lot of him in the freaking hands. I love him, but but catch the ball.
Yeah. It would be an extremely different conversation if he did something with that. And I know that is what we're talking about here, but for him to go from that role to irrelevant is kind of difficult. And the salary's so low that.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
I mean, okay, so a somewhat similar player with a lot of potential for downfield work, Zay Jones. Would you rather play Zay Jones or Davis?
Close, but probably Davis because I have more confidence in the offense. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, tight end. I do like Darren Waller, despite the fact I have pretty low expectations for the Raiders offense. He meshes well with his defense, just with the way they play. And we saw that in their first matchup. He had 8 targets, 116 yards, 15.1 FanDuel points in that game. Last week came back and played his regular role. 9 targets, ran a lot of routes, didn't do a lot on them and didn't look 100%. But I think that everything combined, low salary, good route rate, targets, etc., that meshes well to make him still probably the best tight end in the slate at 63, despite my reservations. So I think I downgrade him, but so did FanDuel. So I think it's Waller, tier down to Knox, tier down to Henry for this slate. What about you?
Yeah, for sure for me. Waller ran 93% of the routes in week 18, 2 catches on 9 targets for a catch rate over expectation of a minus 35. Or minus 34. Sorry, I don't want to besmirch Darren Waller too much, but got a downfield target, 9.1 yard ADOT. That's good for a tight end. I think that with the matchup being what it is, Cincinnati not particularly strong against tight ends once you adjust. He's the guy. He is rating out extremely well in my Sims. 55% likely to lead tight ends on the slate in FanDuel points. Henry and Knox are rating out about the same, but I would definitely go Knox over Henry because, again, just the offensive expectations there.
Okay, so let's talk about running back now. I think that to me, it's Singletary 1, Joe Mixon 2 relative to salary. The question is, do you jam in Mixon or leave some salary on the table in order to get to Josh Allen, to get to Stephon Diggs, get to Jamar Chase, et cetera, et cetera? I think given offensive expectations, I'm okay going with Singletary and Mixon, but it is at least a conversation where I am like, okay, maybe I consider going elsewhere. Then I think it's a tier down to Josh Jacobs, Damian Harris. I prefer Jacobs just because I can feel good about the passing game work. Cincinnati is a team that does encourage you to throw to your, backs against them. So I would say to me, Singletary is 1, Mixon is 2. Jacobs a tier down is 3rd. Damian Harris is 4th, but still a decently strong consideration because I wouldn't be shocked. We talked about this in previous years. If we see the Patriots narrow things down in the playoffs, they seem to have told us that they think Damian Harris is the best back in their backfield. I know Ramondre last week missed time because he was getting checked for a concussion, came back in. But I think when the chips are on the table, they prefer Damian Harris. So I could see his role increasing, which is why I think that he's kind of by Jacobs, but still not on the same tier as Singletary and Mixon because he's $7,500. That's just kind of high for his role. So that's where I'm at with running back. Where are you?
Yeah, I would say almost exactly the same, but I would probably go Singletary tier 1, Mixon and Jacobs about tier 2 because of the salary gap, but that's kind of just semantics and being nitpicky.
Is that because you're high on Singletary or just tepid on Mixon?
being realistic and pragmatic about a salary of 85 and what that does to the rest of my lineup.
Okay.
I think that's what it comes down to.
Cool.
But yeah, with Harris specifically, because I think he's just the number 4 option. In both games against the Bills, he went over 100 yards rushing, 18 for 103 and 3 touchdowns, and then 10 for 111 and a touchdown. I'm not saying that Bill Belichick will just look at the rushing yardage output, but realistically, he's going to get his, a solid workload. There's going to be potential for rushing yardage, especially if it is kind of backwards. And I'm probably doing some mental gymnastics that I wouldn't do otherwise if it wasn't a 2-game slate. But if they're playing from behind and Buffalo's just kind of, keying on the pass, Damian Harris could probably get some like third, fourth quarter runs for like chunk plays. Which again is kind of like a galaxy brain thought, but realistically, he's going to get a big workload here this week. And so I don't want to be, I've historically been low on Damian Harris, and I don't want to do that again this week.
I mean, part of it's because on a full slate, we need upside, and his biggest downside is upside, given that, like, he doesn't get a lot of passing game work, and that is the easiest path to having a big game.
He did get 4 targets last week.
He did. That's true. Part of that, again, because Ramondre was getting checked for a concussion, but that does matter. They will use him. I think he ran 11 routes in that game. So not a great role, but still there. Saw some negative sentiment towards Joe Mixon chat via William. So I just want to explain why I like Mixon, and I think that he is at least in a similar tier to Singletary. If you look at the running backs on this slate in their most relevant sample, Mixon is at 25 adjusted opportunities per game, which is carries plus 2x targets. That is second behind Josh Jacobs. And I have higher expectations for the offense for Joe Mixon. His 99 yards from scrimmage per game in that sample are the best. His 43% red zone share is the best in the slate by a decent margin. Second is Jacobs at 36%. So he actually is a standout. I think the salary does make it tough, and that's why it's at least a discussion of whether I spend up for him. But the role is very good in aggregate. And we did see the Bengals lean pretty heavily on the rush the first time they faced the Raiders. I don't think that's like what they'll do this time around, but like if Higgins is banged up, I think he's a very good play. So I'm very on board with Joe Mixon and okay with spending it over. It's the salary, the main thing that is a detractor there. William said he was being sarcastic. So yeah. I just did that whole thing for no reason. Sorry, William, my bad.
Well, and he also said that compared to Harris, Mixon is relatively low salaried, which is true. Like Mixon is a value relative to Damian Harris, but I think it's more that Damian Harris is over salaried.
Yeah,
and again, if you go through and build a lineup and you just start with Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Singletary, Waller, and then if you look at defense, if you want to play at least one of the home teams here and you play the Bengals, you need 3 receivers and a flex, and you're at 65-50, which is doable. But they're
probably using one of Zay Jones or Gabriel Davis in that build.
But like you're just running into limited options that you can feel good about with your receivers, and so then you're building kind of similar lineups. And I don't even know. I mean, if you want to play Joe Mixon, Josh Allen with the same lineup, it's down to 63. So like my issue is there's not enough pass catching value to sit here and say like, yeah, I'm going to be locking in Joe Mixon because I don't want to be throwing in too many lower salaried receivers I don't feel great about.
Yeah, you can make it work. Like if you go, I'm actually a Burrow in there, but like Burrow, Mixon, Chase, that lineup works without getting too stupid. And I think that is a pretty viable route for this week. So, okay, let's say priority plays for this slate, all chips on the table. Regardless, you don't need to like list a tight end if you don't want. You don't need to list a receiver if you don't want. Who are the guys you are building around for the Saturday only slate?
Singletary, Jamar Chase, Darren Waller, and honestly, potentially Josh Jacobs. Because if I can flex Mixon, Jacobs, well, I think it really comes down to those 4 running backs. I don't know if I want to touch anyone else. So I think by default, like all 4 of those backs, least likely of all, Damian, are my priorities.
I would say Singletary's my only priority at running back because like I could talk myself into going with just 2 running backs and like, if I jam in Diggs, T. Higgins, Chase, et cetera, I can make that work. So from a priority perspective, it's just Singletary. Realistically, I'll probably have 3, but like priority, Singletary. I think that T. Higgins, if we get good clearance on him from Thursday's practice, he'll be a priority for me because he's $600. It's way too low salaried. If you look at their market share since he came back, 24% overall, 30% deep, 20% in the red zone. It's a very good role. It's not Jamar Chase's role, but it's a very good role. And the odds he outscores Chase are probably like, 40, 45%. That's pretty high. So I think that works for sure. I think that Waller is a priority for me, despite the low expectations. Any other notes for you on the Saturday only slate, or should we move on to Sunday?
Just taking a quick sweep here. I think we covered everything. I know we spent a lot of time on quarterback, but it was relevant. I'm with you where I might not have to flex a running back, but I don't really want to play 4 receivers on this slate either. So
Waller Knox, baby. Waller Knox. Let's ride. Let's move now to the Sunday only slate. That is a 3-gamer starting off with the Eagles and the Bucks. The Bucks 8.5-point favorites there. Total is down to 46, largely due to weather. We have the 49ers at the Cowboys right now. The Cowboys are 3-point favorites. Total for that game is 51. And then wrapping up with the Steelers at Chiefs. Total is 46. Chiefs, shockingly, 12.5-point favorites for that game. Injuries note here, Leonard Fournette is expected back for the Bucs this week. He was designated to return from IR. He was at practice. He apparently put Sean Murphy-Bunting in like a headlock, so I think he's okay. Probably a good sign. Cyril Grayson and Ronald Jones are doubtful, according to Bruce Arians, so I would expect them to be out. Eli Mitchell and Trent Williams did not practice on Wednesday for the 49ers. Mitchell also did not practice last week on Wednesday, but went on to play. So I don't worry too much that he missed practice there. Williams missed week 18 due to an elbow injury, and I would say he's legitimately questionable. He is one of the best offensive players, best players in football. So not having Williams at left tackle would be a pretty big issue for the 49ers. They won without him in week 18 and played well offensively, but just noting that would be an issue. Miles Sanders, limited in practice on Wednesday for the Eagles. To me, that means he's likely to make his return after a 2-game absence. Tyreek Hill, Darrell Williams, Clyde Edwards-Helaire all practice on Wednesday too, which means they should be available for this weekend. So those are the notes for this slate. I think a key to mention here is the weather for Tampa Bay. 22-mile-per-hour winds and rain in the forecast right now. That stinks because I would otherwise view Tom Brady as being a standout for the 6-game slate. And now he's like not even my top quarterback for the Sunday only slate. So that's, I think, a key for me. What are the keys for you and how are you viewing this slate?
Yeah, I think the weather there and philosophy with that game specifically, because we know Philadelphia wants to run the ball, and that's not really how you play against Tampa Bay. If you're trying to go at their weakness, this is a rematch game. 28-22, the Buccaneers won in Philly back in week 6, and Jalen Hurts had 10 carries, Miles Sanders 9. So they ran 19 times through 26 times, really dropped back 28 times. So I really do think that they might try to just keep the ball on the ground, and especially if there's wind, just try to grind clock, keep this Tampa Bay offense off the field. It makes sense that that's what they're going to do. That plus the weather makes it really hard, like you said, to go at Tom Brady. So I think that's a big factor because, this is a 3-game slate, but if you say one of these games is going to be pretty bad, and then we have
talking
one
about
offense
Steelers Chiefs.
well, we have
that game might be better, or the rain game might be better than that one, even if it's like 40-mile-per-hour winds.
Well, it's not to say that if Philly tries to run the ball a lot, that game will have no fantasy points. But if it's gross, windy, low ADOT passes, plenty of rushes, especially with Leonard Fournette back, I think that Tampa Bay would lean on him, pretty heavily. And then of course Pittsburgh, I don't think you can really justify too many like core plays from Pittsburgh. This all of a sudden goes from a 6-team slate to a 3-team slate, and that really narrows things down. Again, that's not to say like cross off those 3 teams in particular, but we're talking no stacks there, kind of trying to more avoid those games than actively target them. So that does really change my philosophy on this slate.
Yeah. Looking at the Eagles rushing offense, I think that is kind of a key for this slate because Miles Sanders, again, $5,900. I know people hate Miles Sanders, which, is fine. I get it. I can't push back on that at all. He's burned me a lot this year. I haven't used him a lot, but he's burned me when I've used him. Anyway, they face some really good rush defenses this year. They face the Saints in week 11, 242 yards on the ground in that game. They were very good as a rushing offense there. Other teams they faced are not as stout as the Bucks, obviously, but they faced 49ers back in week 2 before they actually decided, hey, we should run the football. Jalen Hurts is our quarterback. Weird. 151 yards rushing in that game. So I think their rushing offense is good enough to move the ball in the Bucks. The Bucks rushing defense has not been as good down the stretch as they were last year. I think they finished 10th against the rush based on numberFire schedule adjusted metrics. Teams didn't test them much, but when they did test them, they could move the football. So I kind of feel like the Eagles could be okay in this game from a rushing perspective, which is why I am in on Miles Sanders at 59. He's played 2 games with Jordan Howard. I think that is the most relevant sample here because they like Jordan Howard. But in those games, Sanders had 94 yards from scrimmage and I think a $142, depending on which one we're going with. No, sorry, 146 in the other game. That was despite having snap rates of 46% and 49%. Still a lot of yardage because they were so run heavy. 36% red zone share for him in that second game, which is the one game where he left early in that game, but played for most of that game before then. So I feel like Sanders at $5,900 is a pretty good play for the Sunday only slate. And I'm actually considering him for the 6-game slate as well. How are you viewing the Eagles in general if we assume this weather does hold?
So week 6 and week 11. Sorry, my interns were trying to run the numbers and give them to me. And
yes,
by interns, I mean
all 37 interns that we have. Yes.
By interns, I mean myself. I was trying to run my data. So week 6, week 11, those 2 games against those tougher run defenses that you discussed. Philly in non-garbage time, which means their pre-snap win probability is between 20 and 80%, had a 55% pass rate. League average in that split is generally like 59%. So they're still pretty run heavy, not maybe as run heavy, but still you would expect that they are going to come out and do what they can to run the ball.
What was it in week 11 specifically? Because week 6 was before they decided, hey, we should run the football.
In week 11 specifically, it was 40%.
40% pass rate?
Yeah.
I think we can expect something similar this week.
So yeah, that's a good call. Sorry, the interns are
I'm your intern, I think is the takeaway here.
Yeah, I have to have a word with you after the show as my intern. But yeah, I mean, and I don't want to simplify that entire game to Philly's going to run the ball, and that means that there's going to be fewer plays and fewer points. But that's really what we see with rushing teams, unless you're super efficient, which they can be. I don't know if they're going to be hyper efficient in this particular matchup. But that being said, they're going to be fine bleeding clock. And if you have Tom Brady forcing throws downfield, trying to make things happen in 20-mile-an-hour winds without Antonio Brown, without Chris Godwin, it's not necessarily the most promising game. So I am low on this game, and therefore I think I'm going to be high on the other 2 games, specifically with Dallas and San Francisco.
And it made me feel weird to say we're low on this game because I think that for both of us, one of the best plays the entire weekend is in this game. Yeah. Other side, that's Leonard Fournette. $7,300 coming off of IR. He was at practice last week. He was not designated to return until this week. He couldn't return until this week because the last week was his 3rd game in IR, but he was at practice last week. To me, that says he is going to be relatively healthy for this game. If we look at the games since Leonard Fournette's snap rate increased, it is now a 10-game sample, I believe. In those 10 games, 103 yards from scrimmage per game. That would be, if Chase Edmonds plays, that would be number 2 on this slate behind Sanders. Sanders is a 2-game sample. So of the larger samples in the slate, it'd be number 1. He has a 36% red zone share in that time, 15 carries, 6 targets per game. It's a stupid role. He is facing a non-elite defense. They showed during the time he was gone that they missed him. Ronald Jones is doubtful. I think Leonard Fournette, among all players in the 6-game slate, is the standout of everyone, unless we get negative reports around his health. What about you?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even care if Jones plays. Like, I think it's just Leonard Fournette's backfield. We're getting playoff Lenny again.
Ronald Jones, who?
Basically. Yeah, Philly, just the league average defense based on numberFire's metrics against the run. Fournette just honestly is the best play. And so once you factor in, again, the weather, they're getting Fournette back, who they've leaned on and who has been good in a non, elite matchup. Like,
Roses
says 100% playoff Lenny.
I hope that's what it was. I hope it was not an objection, because if she's objecting to Lenny, we're gonna have to talk.
Yeah,
we're gonna have a discussion about her morals and values.
But this game, I think this game honestly could profile as a lot more run heavy than we would like for maximum fantasy points. Yes, if both teams are super efficient running the ball, there's still paths to fantasy points. Wind just historically though has not been good for quarterback production, passing production. It's not like it's a pretty obvious take, but I think then it comes down to how much you're bumping down this game, how much, if at all, you believe in the Steelers to keep that game competitive. So
yeah, I don't care about the running backs in terms of like if this game is bad, because they'd be bad because it is a running back. So it would be more so, how much do I downgrade Brady, Evans, Gronkowski, Perriman? A decent amount because of the weather, not because of like it being run heavy, just because the weather stinks. So I would still rank Brady third among quarterbacks on this slate, slightly ahead of Hurts, very slightly ahead of Hurts, but behind Dak and Mahomes. So it would be a downgrade for sure, because like Brady be in play for first if not for the weather. So that's where I'm at there. Let's talk about the Bucs passing game quickly, then we'll move on to some other games here on the Sunday slate. I think if we assume the weather sticks, I will still be in on Evans. I will still be on Perriman, still be on Gronk. It just moves them down. So on the Sunday only slate specifically, if we're talking about that one, I would say it moves Evans below Tyreek for sure. He'd probably be below Tyreek anyway. It would put me, I would say, even with Evans and the Cowboys receivers, probably slightly leaning towards the Cowboys guys. And that says a lot to me because I wanted to not be super high on them, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, because things are so spread out with them. That's a concern for me. That's how much I would downgrade him. As far as Brashad Perriman goes, I still think that he'd be an option because he's $5,200. It's not like they're not going to throw it all. They would still throw. Perriman did run a good number of routes in Week 18 because Cyril Grayson left early. In that game, Perriman ran 28 routes, 6 targets. 2 of those were deep, 1 in the red zone. Tyler Johnson ran more routes and had 1 more target, but no deep targets, 1 red zone target. Hasn't earned a lot of targets at all this year, despite running a lot of routes. So I prefer Perriman over Johnson. I'd still use him, but like my enthusiasm toward using him would go down. Where are you at in the Bucs passing game?
Yeah, I was trying to get the interns to pull up Tom Brady's splits in the wind.
Chris Allen I think he's a 4 for 4 now. He does tremendous weather work. And I think if I remember correctly, his numbers have said previously that Brady is not super negatively impacted by weather. And he's played in it a lot because of Foxborough. So, but it's more so like combination of very high wind and rain that scares me there.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's going to be hard to build around the Tampa Bay passing offense whenever I just instead can go to Dallas. We'll talk about CeeDee Lamb when we get there, but overall, I think that this again comes down more to like a pivot type of offense. If you're pivoting away from, Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, pivoting away from Dallas. So I think that nobody's really a core play for me given the weather. If it wasn't for the weather, I think that I could probably put Mike Evans there, Rob Gronkowski as well, although tight end, honestly, on this slate is pretty stacked.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that this is just more of a differentiation type of play. Similar to how I'm viewing the Raiders, but I'm still much higher on this offense, even in this conditions that I am on the Raiders.
I agree with you. Okay, let's move now to the other games on this slate. I think to me, right now, Dak Prescott is my number 1 quarterback on this slate. ? Kind of like him a lot. I think that he is up there in terms of the full 6-game slate too. That is for a couple reasons. First one is Tyron Smith was on the COVID list, should be back for this game. That's always an upgrade for him. It is a close game. Dak has had a lot of blowouts recently where he's lost time later in games because they've just been obliterated. He's had bad games too, and he hasn't played well in those games. But like the spike weeks are there. I know how to stack him. Like obviously the floor is not great for Lamb, Cooper, Schultz, Cedric Wilson, but they all have paths to upside. And I think that matters a lot. So I kind of think I have Dak over Mahomes. What about you at quarterback?
I'm not going to fight you on that one, especially with the salary savings. I know we have an extra game here, so that gives us extra chances for value plays, but I view them about relatively equal at salary, so I'm fine to go Dak. The thing with Dak is, well, I guess this also applies to Mahomes a little bit more now too, is Dak can spread it out, so hitting on this stack is like tricky, but Mahomes is kind of doing that too, especially in the red zone. Like that's been kind of a trend all season where they share the ball in the red zone. So if I kind of feel like I'm not going to hit on the right stack, I'm fine going. Nah, I don't really think I can go Dak naked. Like I think I'd still try to force a stack there.
Yeah.
Even if I'm going to miss. But yeah, for sure, I think Dak is basically on the same plane as Mahomes straight up. And with the salary, I think I would put him by a hair over Mahomes for this week.
Preference for you in the Cowboys pass catchers?
So I did some film grinding because I was confused as to why CeeDee Lamb played so much last week but had just 2 targets. His target shares have been low. He's had 5, 4, and 2 targets. I know that it's unlikely to stick forever. But in that film analysis that I was kind of doing, looking at that game from last week, it seemed like he just ran a lot of go routes. And so his yards run per route was one of the higher marks for him all season. I don't know if that's something that they're trying to do more. Maybe it was just something matchup specific that they tried to use him to space things out and throw underneath, which I could definitely.
I think it's because Gallup's out, and so he's running outside, whereas he was in the slot more and Gallup was there.
Yes.
So what I would say is it increases his volatility, but does not decrease his upside.
No, it's not an upside thing. It's what are the odds he gives me 4 or 5 targets again, doesn't break 10 FanDuel points. Like it's high enough that I don't think that he's very clearly the one. So I might go Amari over CeeDee Lamb.
I think I'm okay letting sentiment dictate where I go here because target shares are pretty even. If we look at the games they've played without Michael Gallup, so an 8-game sample,
they're all 19%.
CD's at 20%. Amari's at 20%, 19.6. So like 1 target difference. Dalton Schultz at 18%. I do downgrade him a bit with Blake Jarwin being back because Jarwin takes some routes away from Dalton Schultz. So that's something to note there. Deep targets are 30% for Lamb, 26% for Cooper, 18% for Cedric Wilson. Cedric Wilson's at 12% in this sample. So like he could pay off, and that's why I'm okay considering him. But like if we were talking about a full slate, I wouldn't, there's not enough there to trust. But for the Sunday slate, he's well below Brandon Ayuk for me in that 6,000-ish range, but he could be fine. The red zone shares, I'm going to read these to you. Lamb 9%, Cooper 18%, Dalton Schultz 13, Zeke 13, Cedric Wilson 13.
That's what I'm talking about. I think it's so hard to hit the right stacks whenever they just share the ball. And it's like I said, it's with the same thing with the Chiefs. So I want to be fair there.
Well, it's not. Okay, so let's sorry, okay. Not to correct you, but they played 4 games since their bye with Tyreek and Kelsey being healthy. I omitted week 18 because Tyreek was not healthy.
So you're not looking at the full season when this has been the case?
No, because they shifted things since the bye. They changed some things philosophically. They stopped throwing deep as much, basically. Yeah. But in that 4-game sample, Tyreek is a 25% overall, Kelsey 25%. Tyreek 47% of the deep work. Again, less volume. Kelsey's at 6% there, so use a lot more underneath, which he should be. Red zone share. Tyreek 32%, Kelsey 32%.
Oh yeah.
So they're still going to be chaotic because like Andy Reid they've known they've been in the playoffs for a bit. He's had some time to cook up some Andy Reid nonsense, which is fun. I'm pro Andy Reid nonsense, but I think those shares will go down, but I think there might be better than perception.
That's fine. I mean, it's not like I was going to talk myself out of Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill either way.
No,
but
I think it's more so to say I have full confidence in just stacking Mahomes with those two and not worrying about the side guys, the side pieces.
So then why are we putting Dak above Mahomes if we know where the stacks are going?
Because I like Dak overall more because he's playing indoors. He's facing a team that's more competitive. And I don't care as much if I whiff on the stack because like everyone has a bad floor, so like everyone will just embrace it.
Yeah, he's playing against the team that knows that they're bad and shouldn't even be in the playoffs.
Well, one player on their team thinks that at least. So there's that. Okay. You want to talk about the Chiefs relative to the slate? How you viewing Tyreek compared to wide receiver, Kelce compared to tight end, etc.
Okay, so the Chiefs. I'll let you talk about. Now I'll talk about their running backs. So I don't really talk about running backs a lot. Or do you want me to talk specifically about the pass catchers?
No, you can talk about the running backs if you want. I just don't. What are you gonna say about them?
Oh well, all right, fine. I'll talk about Tyreek specifically.
Do you want to talk about CEH and Darrell Williams?
Well, I think we gotta cover him, but I'll talk about Tyreek.
You can.
So Tyreek Hill has been basically not good lately. The FanDuel points haven't been there. The target shares have been way up and down. But if you look back at those specific matchups, he's played a lot of teams that have kind of been either good at limiting the downfield pass or just straight up limit the downfield pass. He's also been dealing with that, an illness. And so I think that there's a little bit more to his workload than maybe meets the eye. There's no reason to play him, run him into the ground. I think people might look back at, in the game logs against Pittsburgh and say, well, 2 targets, 2 catches, 19 yards, but he didn't even play. I think he played 41% of the snaps. Definitely wasn't half. And it really just feels like this is a spot where, the Steelers are 23rd in ADOT allowed. So they're not really that great at preventing the downfield pass. So that could kind of give Hill both the underneath work that they've kind of game planned more, but also just have some more downfield work. So Hill, despite the results he's given us, I really want to have plenty of exposure to. And it feels weird because Deebo Samuel seems like the much higher floor play with plenty of stealing as well. But I kind of anticipate playing a lot of Tyreek Hill this week. So I want to hear your thoughts on Tyreek. And then I guess maybe we'll talk about Tyreek versus Deebo whenever we get to that game more.
Yeah. I think the only downside of Tyreek is game script where they could just blow him out and not need him. I think the role is fine. I have no concerns about that. He was a full practice on Wednesday, which means that heel issue that cropped up in week 18, not a big issue. So I have him number 4 at wide receiver, considering salary for the full 6 game slate behind T. Higgins. I think Ayuk is up there, and then Cooper Kupp, and then Tyreek Hill. I think he's amazing. So I'll be very high on him. I'm hoping people avoid him because of that stuff. I don't really worry about it. The only reason I'm not higher is because I don't expect the Steelers to do a whole lot in this game. So I think Tyreek grades that really well. I also think Travis Kelce is 1 or 2 at tight end. If we consider the weather in Tampa Bay, because I think that Gronk could be up there if not for that. But I think it's Ertz versus Kelce for the 6 game slate at tight end. I think they're both standouts to me, and I want to be high on them. Maybe I should be higher on Mahomes as a result of that, but I still think that, that's that. Let's talk about running back overall. We talked about Lenny. We talked about Sanders. We still have Eli Mitchell. We do have the Chiefs running backs. You want to discuss them. We have the Cowboys running backs. You want to discuss them, and Najee Harris. Where are you at on the non-Lenny, non-Miles Sanders running backs in this slate?
I have Elijah Mitchell the next tier.
After Lenny?
Yeah.
I agree.
And then I think it's a tier drop to, I don't even know who. I think so.
I think it's Miles Sanders 3 for me.
Probably. Yeah. We have Ezekiel Elliott at 77, Najee 8,000. Those are 2 specific backs I would target as backs with really good workloads, but no fear of a ceiling, like 150 rushing yards, or like 150 total yards and like 2 touchdowns. I don't really see here.
Well, they don't use in the red zone, so
yeah. I think maybe Najee against like a team that isn't super stout against the run might just see like 30 carries.
30 carries, 68 yards, no touchdowns.
So against Kansas City, he had 19 for 93 on the ground, 7 targets, 5 catches, 15 for 13.5 FanDuel points. Now, he has had over 20 FanDuel points in 2 of his past 5, and that's our big knock on Najee is not having ceiling, but he scored in both of those games. I don't know. I feel like I don't need to play Najee very heavily. I don't think I'm going to get... Go ahead.
6-game slate, Najee or Mixon?
Mixon.
By a mile for me. I agree. Yeah. I think pretty easily there. Eli Mitchell, I'll give you my pitch, then you can give yours. Okay. In the games he has played, so not even like adjusting for the fact that he's left a lot of these games due to injury, he is at 8 or 19 carries per game, 2 targets per game, 100 yards in scrimmage per game. And if you look at the games he has played, it's 5 games since George Kittle's return with himself and Deebo Samuel in the lineup. I know there's a lot of qualifiers there, but it's a 5-game sample.
This offense has been needed the most caveats, I think, of any.
Correct. But in that sample, Eli Mitchell, I lost this number. Okay, I tweeted it. What?
Would you want me to give my pitch and then you can circle back?
Sure. Let me find this.
All right.
Actually, I don't tweet enough. I can find it pretty easily. Okay, so yeah, here we go. So it's a 5-game sample. In those games, since Kittle came back. So this is more like later season Eli Mitchell. Is probably a good thing. 21 carries, 3 targets per game, 111 yards in scrimmage. That's a very good number. That's why I think he's number 2 behind Lenny. And having him second is not because I dislike him. It's because I love Lenny. So that's why I like him a lot. Also, red zone share goes down. He's at 28% there because they give Deebo some red zone work. Deebo's red zone share in that sample is 31%, which is absurd for a wide receiver.
Rushing or overall?
Overall. 31% overall share is absurd for a wide receiver.
Yeah.
Absurd.
So for me, Eli Mitchell, even if I look just at the past 2 games since he returned, when he played between 50 and 60% of the snaps, which, you know, let's say that's his role. That's fine. There's really no right way to do this, I think, with this specific offense because there's been so much change. One of these games, even, you know, different starting quarterback for the 49ers. But in those games, with potentially like a scaled back snap rate, at least we could call it, there was not a scaled back workload. He averaged 21 carries for 102 rushing yards with 3 total red zone rush attempts, a red zone target over those past 2 games. He's now had at least 21 carries in 5 straight games. And yes, we value targets a ton, even on FanDuel, because catches and receiving yards, those are worth fantasy points.
What?
But
points are good?
But on a 3-game slate, potentially even a 6-game slate with not a whole lot of slam dunk running backs, like I'm fine being pretty much guaranteed 20 plus carries. And even if they are trailing, they're not going to abandon the run super quickly. They're going to lean on Eli Mitchell with Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Ayuk, being able to kind of move the ball for Jimmy Garoppolo. I still think this offense will be competitive. It's kind of hard to view this offense busting completely. I could be wrong there, but you know, I feel really good with Eli Mitchell.
The odds they bust completely go up if Trent Williams sits, so I would keep his status in mind. But I still think I agree with you.
Fastest game of the week too.
Yeah, I'll take that. Bucks Eagles would probably be pretty fast too, if not for the rain. I think that does downgrade things. I know you're not going based on that, but Cowboys being fast helps. That upgrades the 49ers for sure. Let's talk about the pass catchers for the 49ers. So in that aforementioned sample, which I think is the most relevant sample, Deebo's at 98 yards per game. Ayuk is at 81. Kittle's at 42. So that does not mean George Kittle cannot erupt. I think that it does mean that I look at his salary at 65. If you'd show me that like a couple weeks ago, I'd be like, oh my goodness, like how do I not just use George Kittle in every lineup? I think Kittle is still a very good play, and I would like to get there, but I think he's third. Among the pass catchers, I think it's Ayuk 1 because the salary is so low. Debo 2, Kittle 3. What about for you?
Probably the same for me. If anyone's been listening to the show all season, they know that I'm historically a little bit low on Debo. I just find him extremely hard to project because he's such a hybrid player. I do think that he's a great play. Mm-hmm. There's such a high floor baked in with the way that he gets his touches. There is obviously still a ceiling. Now, the target shares are a little better than they had been when he was getting like 1, 2, and 4 targets. He's had 6, 6, 11 the past 3 games. He's just like an outlier. They're going to lean on him. They're going to get him the ball creatively. So I have no issues with Debo, but like you said, I think salary-wise, it's going to be Ayuk number 1 for me for this week.
Where do you view Debo relative to other top-end receivers on the full 6-game slate? So we got Cooper Kupp there. We have Evans, Chase, Tyreek, Diggs, etc. Where is Debo for you in that equation?
Like baseline, just like floor-wise, number 2 behind Cooper Kupp. Ceiling-wise, probably behind Kupp and Tyreek. Maybe with like Jamar Chase.
Yeah. He's behind Kupp and Tyreek for me. But I think that like that's not a shot. And honestly, like given the state of running back here where I can save salary via Lenny, via Miles Sanders for the 6-game slate, I can go to Devin Singletary as well. That allows me to kind of get freaky and, get to Debo still. So I'd still like to get there. I think that he makes a lot of sense. Ayuk at 61, I think is like a standout for the 6-game slate, much less the 3-game slate on Sunday. Again, 81 yards per game in the sample. It's very good for his salary range. He has set new season highs in yardage in back-to-back games, 94 with Trey Lance against Houston, 107 with Jimmy G last week versus the Rams. He's showing yardage upside. He's $6,100 playing in a dome, a game that I like a lot. I think he's great. I think he's a tremendous play, whether you're playing the 6-game slate or the 3-game slate, very much in on him there. Let's touch briefly on the Steelers. How low are you on Najee and Deontay Johnson?
Low.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty low.
I agree. That's all we need to say. That's fine. Okay. Priorities.
Ben Roethlisberger, so that it's not just left at that. Ben Roethlisberger, since going on the injury report.
I thought you were going to mention him as being an option.
No. Ben Roethlisberger, since going on the injury. Look, I know we don't need to talk about it, but at least here's just
this is
13.6 FanDuel points per game, 211 yards per game, 1.3 touchdowns, 0.9 picks, expected points per drop back of a negative 0.24. That's awful. And his
negative 0.024 or negative 0.24?
0.24.
It's
bad. And a 6.5 yard ADOT. So that just kills upside. And over the past 4 games, it's even worse if you adjust for opponents. Negative 0.29 EPA per drop back, 169 yards per game, 5.7 yard ADOT. His ADOT's trending down quickly. That's not what you want for upside, and that hurts Deontay and Najee if they're not going to get into red zone position often.
Okay, priority plays for the Sunday only slate. Go.
Sunday only, Lenny, Eli Mitchell, Tyreek, Ayuk.
You literally read my list.
Okay.
Did you cheat? This is rude. This is
names. Well, on the Sunday slate, we have 3 at least tight ends we can consider who are studs. I would still say 3 to 4 quarterbacks that we can consider. So I don't really view any of those specifically as priorities, although you and I both have Dak and Mahomes above the 2 quarterbacks from Philly and Tampa Bay. So that's why my core plays are going to come from primarily running back and receiver.
So again, for me, it's same. Lenny, Eli, Tyreek, Ayuk. I think those guys are the priorities in this slate. Highest on Dak at quarterback. Do like Miles Sanders, but those are the priorities for Saturday or for Sunday. Let's move now to the Cardinals versus the Rams on Monday night. Now we're talking here on Thursday, And the single game slate has not yet been posted over on FanDuel.com. So we cannot discuss salaries from that slate, but we probably know generally where people will be. We could talk about them in the context of the 6-game slate as well. So this game right now, the Rams are 3.5-point favorites. Some movement in favor of the Cardinals. Taken. Total is 49.5. Brandon, what is your view of this game?
I like it. I don't want to forget about it. I think maybe people do forget about it a little bit on the 6-game slate just because it's so far off in the distance. And hopefully people try to build around the Saturday slate. I don't know if that's going to be the case. I would say in years past, we probably would have seen plenty of that so people could get up on the leaderboard early. I think that's kind of changed a bit.
Every like Thursday night for like a Thursday through a Sunday or Monday slate, TJ Hernandez, a 4for4 would like tweet out like a roster of someone who had like 8 of their 9 players in the one game. It made my day every time.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we'll get a little bit of that maybe forgotten with this game just because it's so far in the distance on the full slate. But one thing I do want to note is like Matthew Stafford, I think, has kind of been under the microscope lately. And if you cherry pick his worst 3 weeks, like over the past 3 games when he's thrown a lot of picks and that kills your EPA per dropback is picks, he's still at a 0.09 on the positive end. And if you adjust, he's still been pretty solid for about 250 yards per game, 2 touchdowns. So like, I don't want to overreact to this offense. Maybe I'm pitching a straw man argument here, but it does feel like people are a little bit low on Stafford based on,
it's not a straw man.
Okay.
No, you're right.
So I don't think it's as bad. I don't think we have to like divest from this offense at all. And so that gets me very excited to play Cooper Kupp for sure on the 6-game slate.
I agree. If I look at the projected offensive efficiency for full games across the 6-game slate, this is number 2. It's behind Tampa Bay versus Philly. That does not adjust yet for weather. So it could be number 1 very easily because the margin between those two is very small. That to me says if I'm playing the full 6-game slate, I'm kind of okay with stacking this game as being like the focal point of a lineup, starting with Kyler Murray at quarterback, because on full slates, the public tends to under roster slight underdog quarterbacks. I think they will especially do that here where like roster rates matter a little bit more at quarterback because you can see some guys run away. I think we'll see people gravitate towards Mahomes, Allen, maybe Burrow, stuff like that. I don't think they're going to get to Kyler that often. I think that Kyler stacked with Christian Kirk and Zach Ertz grades out really well. Now, Jalen Ramsey's probably going to see a lot of Christian Kirk because Kirk does operate from the slot. Ramsey is in the slot a lot. So I think you do downgrade Kirk a bit. So maybe you just go with Kyler and Ertz, but still either way, I think that grades out well. You run it back with Cooper Kupp and feel good about that. So I think this game actually is kind of fun from a full 6-game slate perspective. Kyler might wind up being my favorite quarterback of this weekend. Where are you at on Kyler, Christian Kirk, Zach Ertz, etc.?
Yeah, I could see that. I do think that he'll be, for a lot of reasons, just a little bit less popular than he deserves to be. Mm-hmm. Again, playing that Monday angle, which could be way off base, but maybe. I really would imagine people are just a little bit lower on this game by nature, especially because we have, if you're playing like heavy Saturday and Sunday only slates, and then you throw in some entries into the 6-game slate, you're probably looking at this game the least. So I think that also kind of fits. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Kyler, I think, is definitely just in that conversation for QB1 for sure. And I would also lean towards stacking him with Zach Ertz over Christian Kirk.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that we do have a lot of stud tight ends in play, I have no issues with Ertz because he's really a stud with his workload, but he's not salaried as such right now.
Yeah, Ertz hasn't had blow up games from a fantasy perspective. That's because of touchdowns, not because of workload. It's just been variance that's worked against him. If you look at the games, the past 4 games with no DeAndre Hopkins, Ertz is at 26% of the overall targets, 29% deep, and 25% in the red zone. He has the building blocks for a huge game. Hasn't gotten there yet. I think it could happen on Monday versus the Rams. Let's talk briefly about the running backs in this game. We have Chase Edmonds and James Conner on the Cardinals side. I'd expect Edmonds to go. We do not have an injury report yet here because they play Monday, so their first injury report is Thursday. Edmonds missed the last game with a rib injury. James Conner was not in the game late. I'm not sure if that was because he aggravated something or if they were saving him for the playoffs, but he was not in that game late against the Seahawks. I'd expect them both to play. If they both play, I don't really have a lot of interest in either, just because, they split so much. As far as the Rams guys go, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I don't know what it's going to be, because Cam Akers, they want to get him more involved. He didn't look great on Sunday in terms of like explosiveness, but you also you wouldn't expect him to be, because he just tore his freaking Achilles. Yeah. But Michelle wasn't great either. So I think there is some, there's some room for movement in the workload for Sony. His salary kind of accounts for that. He's $6,700. So not totally opposed to him still, but I'm not actively seeking out any running back in this game. What about you?
Yeah, not specifically the running backs, because we could have just somewhat timeshares in each of these games. With Cam Akers back last week, he played 20% of the snaps, Michelle at 80%. Now Michelle had a pretty good workload, 21 carries, 4 targets, of which he caught just 1, 5 red zone rushes as well. But if they bring in Cam Akers on the goal line, which they did twice
in the first drive, they did too. Yeah.
Like that alone, you could be looking at, okay, well, Sony Michel got me 85 yards, but what didn't convert on any of his, still probably majority goal line touches, but and that's kind of nitpicky, but I really think that whenever if you're looking at this from a 6-game slate standpoint, you have better running back plays who have clearer paths to ceilings. I don't think you have to get so cute that you just load up on Sony Michel, whose snap rate probably is going to regress from 80%.
Yeah.
So I don't really think that any of these running backs here are priority plays on the 6-game slate either.
So you ran Sims for this single game slate, right?
Yes.
With the salaries, just kind of let us know distribution of MVP stuff. What did you find when you ran those Sims?
So, okay, if I use, all right, so 2 things. Historical stuff, historical optimals in my database, games since 2019 with spreads of 4.5 or tighter and totals of at least 49. 49% of the time, the optimal MVP has been a quarterback. That's about 2.3 points above the full season or the full sample. So basically, you're probably going to play Kyler at MVP. That's a good play. However, running backs are down about 5 percentage points and receivers are up about 4 in these high scoring games. So I think that puts a lot of emphasis on Cooper Kupp as a great pivot toward as your MVP. And actually Kupp, Stafford, and Kyler are all kind of rating out similarly. I would bump up Kyler. This is early, so I did focus on this game a little bit less, but Kupp is about as likely as Stafford to finish his MVP, and I can't imagine that he would be rostered as heavily as Stafford at MVP, but they're both about 28%, and then Kyler is at about 35%, so it doesn't leave a whole lot left for anybody else because you're looking at timeshares for everyone else. So basically, Kupp, Stafford, Kyler, the chalk at MVP with Kyler for sure, but I think Kupp is a great pivot. And I think Stafford, again, for the fact that he hasn't been quite as bad as perception, I think that I don't think you need to get too cute after those guys at MVP. And I think I want to start there with that conversation.
Likely value plays here. We're looking at AJ Green, Antoine Wesley, Tyler Higbee, Van Jefferson, Odell to an extent. What are your numbers saying about those guys? Does anyone stand out in terms of what they may provide?
Stand out, not so much. Okay. Just because of the way that the median projections that they're based around are all pretty tame. I would say that if I was pivoting to anyone else at MVP, I still think it might be Sony Michel, despite the fact that I was so down on him.
I agree.
But we're looking at, even if we still played 80% of snaps last week, if that comes down to 65% in a high scoring game with, again, goal line work, red zone work, there's still a path there, but that's in the context of a single game slate.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I think that value plays, I don't know what Zach Ertz's salary would be, but probably around 11,000, which
10-5, 11. Yeah.
Doesn't quite put him into value territory, but I don't want to overlook Zach Ertz by any means. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot that pops because it's so dispersed.
Okay, let's talk about those other guys like AJ Green, Odell, Van, in the context of the 6-game slate briefly, because we do have Ayuk in that range. T. Higgins is at practice this morning. Ben Baby just tweeted that out. So I've been refreshing Ben's Twitter feed the entire morning. Thank you, Ben. We have Higgins, most likely. We have Christian Kirk, most likely. We do have him, but potentially doing with a bit more Jalen Ramsey. We have Ayuk, et cetera, et cetera. So we actually have options. Anyone stand out to you in terms of the full slate as far as those guys go?
Let me filter this real fast. I got too many things. All right, it's busting. So for me, the interns are letting me down again. I would say probably Christian Kirk, honestly. I still think that the volume's good enough for him. I know the matchup might be problematic, but should get plenty of downfield work. 2.3 since week 15 with Ertz and no DeAndre Hopkins. Like just basically once Hopkins finally left. So I think that Kirk would probably stand out most compared to the Rams guys.
Yeah. Kirk has much better yardage upside, and I think that matters a lot. If we look at the games without Hopkins, 94, 48, 79, 43, whereas Odell hasn't had more than 81 since he joined the Rams, yards that is. 81, 28, 77, 7, 37, 39, 18. So like the yards have been pretty bad. Van can get some yards just because like he gets the kind of targets you want. 31, 63, 6, 23, 58. So maybe not. But like, I think that to me, they're both below Ayuk. They're both below Kirk. Then maybe you get that discussion, but like they're kind of closer to Devontae Smith for me than they are to Christian Kirk.
I would say so, yes.
Okay. Any final thoughts for you on the Monday slate or on the full 6-gamer this weekend?
I'm starting to get I'm hoping that we get this game a little bit less popular on the 6-game slate, and I'm hoping that that's the case. So I'm just gonna hope for it, Jim.
Let's go, Kyler. Let's go, Kyler. That's all I got to say for this weekend. That is all that we have for the wild card weekend of DFS. Hopefully that was helpful for you getting your lineup set for the various slates you can play. Again, just go to FanDuel.com, check out all the slates that are offered there. Stay tuned to news because we didn't have any injury reports for the Monday game yet. Only have one injury report for the Sunday games. Stay tuned to that and fill out those lineups for this weekend. Also, do not forget to subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. You name it, you can find us there. While you're there, leave a rating and review and also hit subscribe because we do have NBA, NHL, DFS via Tom Vecchio, UFC via Austin Swain, PGA is back as well. A lot of good stuff over on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I'm at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Good luck to you across all the slates this weekend. We'll talk to you once again next week to get you set for the divisional round. Welcome back the Packers and the Titans. We'll talk to you then. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.